Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Sterling Heights City Council to order. Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear God, please bless our elected officials. Grant them courage and wisdom to do what is right for all citizens.
Amen.
Amen.
Ms. Riska, can we please have the roll call?
Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Mrs. Sarasky?
Here.
Mrs. Kosky?
Present.
Mr. Radke?
Present.
Schmidt?
Present.
Mr. Yanis?
Here.
Present.
Thank you, Ms. Riska. Council, we need approval of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Mrs. Kosky.
move to approve the agenda.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Is there any discussion? No discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. First item on our agenda tonight is a report from our city manager, Mark Vanderpool. Mr. Vanderpool.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'd like to begin by providing the council an update on our new revenue sharing numbers in light of our new census numbers. As you may recall, our census 2020 numbers came in a little over a year ago, and as part of the new count, the city gets increased revenue, assuming our population goes up, and of course it did. Many cities went down, and unfortunately they'll see a decrease in state shared revenue. So let me just highlight that our new population is 134,346 individuals. That's an increase of 4,647 residents. So the state shared revenue is based on population, as I mentioned, and the new numbers indicate that we will get about $200,000 more a year in direct revenue sharing from the state. But as many of you know, as we highlighted in our census campaign, the state of Michigan receives close to $30 billion a year for federally funded programs like Medicaid, student loans, nutrition programs, road construction, low-income housing, community development block grants, and more. The state, in turn, distributes some of that revenue to local communities also. So when you consider those programs and you spread the increased revenue over the next 10 years, the city, through those various programs, city residents will be getting tens of millions of dollars more in census allocated funding. So it's certainly good news in that respect. And in addition, with respect to the census, the city's state liquor license quota has increased from 86 to 90 licenses. And as many of you know, it's a valuable economic incentive tool for restaurants to locate in Sterling Heights and be able to receive one of those quota licenses if they meet the city's criteria. So that's another benefit for the city's growth. And as everyone knows, the city has been growing, and we expect that trend to continue over the next couple of decades. Although we're fully built out, there's a lot of redevelopment going on in the city. Numerous schools that might have closed are being redeveloped with single-family housing, in some cases multifamily, and we're seeing a lot of residential growth, which is pretty unique for a city that is 95% plus built out. So we have to continue the trend and look forward to the prosperity that the city's been enjoying. I wanted to remind everyone, although it's a couple of months out, especially with some Eagle Scouts in the audience and younger folks, our Shine Day will be held on May 7th, and we're always looking for volunteers. We meet at 9:30 in the morning at First Church on DeQuinder Road. It's a lot of fun. It takes a couple of hours, but we help individuals in need clean up their properties who simply don't have the ability to do so, either through some financial hardships or mobility limitations and the like. So again, May 17th, our Shine Day, and we're always looking for volunteers. And I'm sure everyone will be excited to know that starting Monday, April 4th, the city will begin its 31st year of offering separate curbside collection of yard waste. So you can start setting your yard waste out during that week, April 4th. Just a reminder, they have to be in approved paper bags or a cart with a sticker on it. You can get the stickers at our city facility. So again, that begins on April 4th, a sure sign that summer is around the corner. And also, lastly, on my report, I wanted to provide a brief update. At the last meeting, Councilman Yanez requested that the city administration provide city council a cost for all lawn care based on contracts, including mowing, weed control, and landscaping. And I was able to pull that information together with some help of our staff, and I shared that with City Council, I believe, earlier today. I'm sure you haven't had a chance to digest it yet, but let me just explain in a nutshell what it all means. So the city expends approximately $1 million a year in turf maintenance. So when you think about our rights-of-way, all of the medians across the city, hundreds of miles of these turf areas, like the median on M59, Mound Road, Van Dyke, and Shaner, and the like, and the vast rights-of-way alongside roadways where there are no medians. The city has to maintain that property. Not to mention our 26 parks. Of course, we have a lot of turf maintenance there. And in addition, we have a very proactive private property noxious weed ordinance. We're in residence, and thankfully we have great compliance on this. But there are occasions where homeowners' lawns go into violation, and the city has to coordinate mowing those lawns. Now, of course, we get reimbursed for that. But in any case, that's the scope of some of the work that we have to perform. The work is not only along roadways, it's in parks, it's on private property, and then we also have all of our city facilities, which would include City Hall, the Upton House Police Station, Public Library, District Court, Public Works Facility, Community Center, Senior Center, Amphitheater, Nature Center, Velocity, and all of our fire stations. So you can imagine the scope of this work is pretty significant. Now, the amount in aggregate certainly is a lot of money, but what we do is we bid this out, of course, and we get very good unit pricing. And if you were to compare the unit pricing to residential homes or even commercial businesses, the city gets an incredible cost savings because of our economies of scale and so on. But in the report, we highlight what we're doing to control costs. Of course, our costs depend on the season, whether we have a rainy season or dry season, especially in the spring. Some of the things that we're doing proactively is we're looking at implementing more no-mow areas across the city on city property. We've implemented a number now. We're also looking to pilot various organic fertilizing to be more environmentally friendly to the community and so on. So, Mayor and Council, when you have a chance, you have the report. I look forward to your feedback and welcome any additional ideas that you may have on the subject. And Mayor, with that, that concludes my report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vanderpool. Move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a public hearing. And this is to consider adoption of a resolution in support of an application by the City of Sterling Heights for a Michigan Department of Natural Resources Trust Fund Development Grant to fund the acquisition of a portion of Fillmore Elementary School property located at 8655 Irving Road, Sterling Heights, 48312. We have a presentation from our Parks and Recreation Director, Kyle Langlois, and Adam Young from Wade Trim. Mr. Langlois.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor, members of council, and all gathered here tonight, this evening. The reason for my presentation is to provide a brief introduction to the agenda item before you, which is to hold a public hearing prior to your consideration and vote on a resolution of support for grant application being made through the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund. As you see in the agenda title, the grant application is being made to seek funding to offset the cost of acquiring a portion of land at the former Fillmore Elementary School, currently owned by Warren Consolidated Schools. In the last two iterations of the department's 5-year master plan, our park map, and comments from residents have shown that the city is lacking a municipally owned park facility in this section of the city. Even having over 30 parks and green spaces, this section is one in which there is not a close park within walking distance, and only accompanies areas in the northern section of our city that are deficient. In looking at the map, the closest major park is Baumgartner at 1.8 miles away, and Chappelle Park is the closest neighborhood park at 2.5 miles away. While the concept of acquiring this property is not new and has been a topic of conversation over that time period of 10 years, it recently became more of a potential reality with the COVID-19 relief funds that the city is acquiring. The Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund is a constitutionally protected funding source that was set up to increase access to outdoor recreation opportunities across the state for residents of Michigan to enjoy for generations to come. As the state was getting more and more developed and natural areas were being mined for resources, this was one way to make sure our great state and residents did not lose access to what made Michigan so great, which is its outdoor recreation spaces. Because of the focus on outdoor recreation, this granting source is only applicable to the green space sections of Fillmore, which equates to about 10.3 acres of land, as you can see on this boundary map. The resolution of support that is before you for consideration is just one piece of many items that are required to submit a grant to the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund Board. This particular item shows that the city's decision-making body, which is you as city council members, support the acquisition from a conceptual and financial perspective, as well as having held a public hearing to solicit feedback from our residents. Speaking directly to the financial aspect, the grant application and resolution would commit to a local match amount of $187,500, which equals 30% of the projected cost of the acquisition. As you may have seen in the agenda backup, only 25% match is required, but since this is a competitive grant process, increasing our match to 30% gets more points considering our median household income in Sterling Heights. If the grant is awarded, the matching funds would be paid from the ARPA funds received, and as is generally true in any case, our goal with the ARPA funds is to make that money stretch even further. The ability to apply for a grant to purchase a section of the parcel achieves just that goal. As we could see, approximately $437,000 covered by this grant funding, which would ultimately allow us to move funds to other projects developed in our ARPA action plan or shift funds to other projects that have yet to be established. I want to make certain that I mention that the figures discussed are only estimates and will likely change once we receive a formal appraisal if the application is approved. Also important to note is that the application is non-binding, meaning we can back out even if the project is being recommended by the Trust Fund Board, and we can also amend the scope if we feel that it should change for whatever reason. Now, before Mayor Taylor opens up the public hearing, I wanted to note a handful of items that may be questions in people's minds that I thought would be helpful to kind of kickstart the process here. So the first question is, has the city procured grants like this in the past? And the answer is yes. In fact, much of the city's park system was acquired and developed with grant funds similar to this funding source, as you can see on the screen. The most recent grant that went all the way through was the fishing pier along the Clinton River Trail, and that happened in 2002. We then applied for a grant to replace field lighting at Delia Park in 2013, but was unsuccessful in that venture. And as you can see at the bottom right of the screen, we went through the initial application process in an attempt to leverage funds to create a universally accessible paddle landing at Rotary Park in 2018. We later withdrew that application after submission as we moved in a different direction due to the lengthy timeline of the grant process and desire to establish a landing in shorter order. So of course we do have that landing in place now, but that was done strictly with recreating recreation dollars instead of leveraging those dollars with a grant. Second question, has Warren Consolidated Schools already approved the sale of this property? And the answer to that is no. As I've stated in my previous presentation at the master plan approval process, there is currently no formal approval of purchase from Warren Consolidated Schools on the books, In communicating with the district, however, we have been notified that the school board would consider an offer to purchase the property by the city if the grant was approved by the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund and the State of Michigan legislator. As a formality of the grant application, a letter stating that they would consider the offer was provided by the district, but no financial considerations have been formalized or are part of that letter. That would be a violation of the grant application procedures, and considering the amount of money that we're working with, we are not really desiring to compromise that process along the way. Third question that some might have is, do we have a master plan for the green space if approved? In fact, I saw some questions about this on social media over the weekend, and the answer to that is no. At this time, we do not have a specific plan in place. This is really step one to the process. The Parks and Recreation Department has preliminarily identified a number of park amenities that could be considered for this space if approved, and choose to move forward. If we do move forward, we would retain a consultant using ARPA funds to take these ideas and mesh those ideas with with ideas from residents through surveys and town hall meetings to create a master plan that would then come back to City Council for approval at a later date. On that same front, what is the plan for the building and remaining land? As we've talked about, this grant would be just for the green space. There is still about 4 acres or so of property that would not be covered with this grant. But although we do not know this for certain, the expectation is that the school district would not be interested in selling only the green space. And if in fact that was the case, the city would need to utilize remaining ARPA funds or other general funds to purchase the remaining acreage. While the grant-funded section of the property would be restricted to outdoor park use in perpetuity, there are various opportunities that would be explored, ranging from recreation only to housing and even public-private partnerships for the rest of the property. Like the green space above, we will take time to look at solutions from all angles internally and solicit feedback from stakeholder groups to create a master plan that would again be brought to council for approval at a later time. Question number 5, why are we submitting the grant at this time? As we try to leverage ARPA funds by obtaining a grant, we have to play within the timeline boundaries of each funding source. ARPA funds require obligation by the end of 2024 and a deadline to expend funds of 2026. In turn, the grant timelines for the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund are very long. Knowing that we wouldn't find out if our application is being recommended until December of 2022, with funds becoming available in mid to late 2023, depending on when the state actually passes their budget, getting our application in on this grant cycle was necessary. Otherwise, we would lose potentially a year and a half and miss the ARPA timelines and would not match up accordingly. In addition, if approved on all fronts, this would allow us to start engaging our residents and activating the future's park space in a more timely manner, which is better for the area residents than a vacant school. So number 6, what are our next steps? There are still a number of tasks that need to be completed in order to get the grant submitted on or before the April 1st deadline. Concurrent to our efforts tonight, we are collecting letters of support from community members to be included with the comments from tonight's public hearing. Mr. Young and his colleagues at Wade Trim are in the process of compiling the narrative and basis for the grant application to be submitted per the deadline. After April 1st, over the next 3 to 5 months, grant coordinators from the State of Michigan Department of Natural Resources will review our application, provide preliminary scoring, and give us an opportunity to enhance our application if needed. Recommendations for funding are made by the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund Board again at a December meeting in 2022. And if approved by our state legislators, the appropriations would be included in the state budgets and agreements would then be put into place. It is only at that time that we would be able to start the process of getting official appraisals and submitting an offer to the school district for consideration. So in closing, I thank you for the opportunity to provide some background information leading into the public hearing tonight. This is a unique opportunity to grow our park system without the use of general fund dollars, and more importantly, is an opportunity to provide access to recreation in an area that currently lacks a park. In turn, we will be able to expose the area residents to the benefits of living in close proximity to a neighborhood park, which we all know are increased health benefits, Also, significantly higher real estate benefits as well. At this time, I'd like to quickly turn the microphone over to Mr. Young from Wade Trim to make a few additional comments before we kick it back over to the public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor and members of council. I just wanted to speak a little bit with regard to the couple of things. First, the basis or the rationale, the need for this grant or why it's important. As we're working on providing and crafting the narrative that gets submitted along with the application, we're looking at justification for this project. Using maps, we were able to show the half-mile radius of this property if it were developed as a neighborhood park. The DNR suggests that that is the kind of the service radius of a neighborhood park. There's more than 1,100 single-family homes that are within a half mile of this park. And there's 95 multiple-family residential buildings of unknown number of units. That's based on building footprint data that SEMCOG has provided that we have access to. It just kind of speaks to the number of residents in the area that could be benefited from the proximity to this park. In the recently adopted Parks and Recreation Master Plan, it addressed generally the looking for potential for acquisition of properties for recreation development. And there were a number of goals that were outlined in the recreation plan. And I just wanted to mention a couple of them. One of the goals and objectives in the plan was to be aware of real estate that may become available for use or expansion of public recreational areas, particularly in those areas of the city that are currently underserved, and properties no longer utilized by the school districts or other agencies within or adjacent to the city. Another objective is to consider acquisition of the former Fillmore Elementary School site for development as a new neighborhood park within an area that is currently underserved by city park facilities. You may recall, I think even commented at the public hearing during the Parks and Recreation Plan, that there's a map in the plan itself that shows park service area gaps. Again, highlighting the fact that this particular area in the city, this neighborhood is underserved, does not have a neighborhood park. Procedurally, this evening is a public hearing. This is the opportunity for the public to make comments about this application. Once the public hearing is closed, as Kyle said, you have a resolution in front of you. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have along with Kyle. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Young and Mr. Langlois. At this time, I'll open up the public hearing. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on this item? Ms. Early.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. I'm here in support of the project. I remember Kyle came to me last week, Mr. Langlois, sorry, and gave the news that there is a grant that will be pursued. And I remember back when we were doing the master plan for the city, I advised to do a park there because I live in the area. And by then my son was little, we didn't have a place. The only little park that was there was from the school. And the school, sometimes if you were there, they will ask you to leave. So we were left out with no place to go, and we had to go somewhere else further. So I'm in support, and I think it's a great idea. I do have a question because you mentioned, Mr. Langlois, that beside recreation is housing. I would like for you to extend a little bit. I know the design, nothing is in place now, which I would like to offer my skills as an architect and designing for free. I love the area, I can give it. But the housing, especially when in this moment there is an opposition from residents for the apartments that are being proposed by that area too, and the residents are opposing to those apartments because we have plenty of apartments. So I don't know what type of housing. My question will be, what are you considering there? And in support of the park. We got a lot of young people now in the area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Early. Anyone else on the public hearing? If not, I'll close the public hearing, and council, we need a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Radke.
resolve to adopt a resolution in support of the application by the City of Sterling Heights for a Michigan Department of Natural Resources Trust Fund grant to fund the acquisition of a portion of Fillmore Elementary School property located at 8655 Irving Road, Sterling Heights, Michigan, 48312.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any discussion, Mr. Radke?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I am highly in support of this application. It has been a goal of mine since I got elected to improve the neighborhood parks in our city, and part of the city that's underserved is that 15-mile and Van Dyke area. On a parks map, which I didn't have today, but which I've seen before, there's actually a big gap right in that area, right where Carlton Elementary is. And it's one of the only areas in the city that doesn't have a public park. And, we've advocated up here before that you should be able to walk to your local public park. We funded Recreation, which rebuilt a lot of our public parks. But I think it's a stretch to ask people to walk to Baumgartner Park, which would be the closest park to this neighborhood, over almost 2 miles away without sidewalk to get to the park. So I think it's been a long time coming. It's something that we need to do. I look forward to also taking the building with other funds, hopefully, to create a Southern Community Center or some other type of amenity. But this is the best thing for the neighborhood. Otherwise, I guarantee you that Warren Consolidated Schools will sell this for housing. So for us to acquire a public park to serve the residents, I think is the highest and best use. I fully support this, and I urge my colleagues to, too. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Radke. Mrs. Sarowski.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Taylor. I also I supported this, of course, but I'm also very highly in support of this. I'm lucky. I am so lucky that I can walk to Dodge Park. And this amenity is really something I wish my kids, who are now grown adults, and I have a granddaughter who can, when she comes here, can come with me. I wish we could have had this park as it is now when my children were little, because it's a beautiful park, and I really would love to see a park of this type for all the residents to walk to at any time. So I am completely in favor of being able to put in a park at all the walkable areas of our city, and certainly for the Fillmore location. And I'm looking forward to being able to do something like that in the southern portion of the city. So great. I'm happy to be able to find an area, location that we can use, and very much in favor of it. So thank you, Mayor Taylor.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Sarowski. Anyone else, council? Mrs. Zarcone.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I have to agree with my colleagues. I think this is a great investment. I know that when we were using Fillmore while the community center was being built, it was nice to watch the neighbors in that area go to classes there at Fillmore. They either walked or they rode their bikes there. So you knew the building has already had a purpose and it was in use. And I think that will only continue if we purchase first, hopefully, the property as far as the land. And I would really look forward to being able to buy the building as well in the future. So I'm definitely in favor of this.
Anyone else?
Mayor Taylor?
Mrs. Schmidt.
Thank you. I, too, am in favor of pursuing this grant for the park property. However, I have huge concerns about purchasing the building. As I've said in the past, funding and maintaining and filling that building with personnel is a huge concern for me. When we did Recreation, we made sure that those expenses were covered through the bond issue, and I'm not so sure that that's what's going to happen here. So the fact that we're not obligated, I think definitely the need for the park is there in that neighborhood, and I'd be excited for that to happen. However, like I said, we'll see what happens down the road as far as a master plan that comes into play for that building or the property that the building is on. I'm curious to see. I guess through the chair to Mr. Vanderpool, if we don't get the grant, I'll play devil's advocate, what is the plan then?
Mr. Vanderpool.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilwoman Schmidt, the city would have a number of options. We could possibly pursue some other resources to acquire the open space. That could be additional ARPA money. It could be additional grant funding. There is no great urgency at the moment, other than the fact that we have this cycle for the Natural Resources Trust Fund grant. So this is an opportunity that's here right now, but if it doesn't pan out, we'll look at some other ideas. And as you mentioned, with respect to the building, we would have to go through a very thorough master plan process to see what are some potential options for the city council to consider. There may not be any viable options with the building, but there very well may be. But it all depends on return on investment for the city, what the community feels is a project that might fit in the area with respect to potentially the school and so on. So this is, as Mr. Langlois mentioned, it's really just the beginning. We have many other options with this property.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Council, anyone else? If not, I will say I'm in support of it. I think it's an exciting project. I'd like to see a park in that area, and I'm hopeful that we can get this done and that we put forward a great application. So thank you, Mr. Young and Mr. Langlois, for your presentations. Appreciate that very much. Without any further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on, next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on any item on tonight's consent agenda? Not, I'll close that. On council, we need a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Mrs. Konski.
move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Support.
It's been moved and supported with no discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on our agenda tonight is a consideration item, and this is to consider approval of the fiscal year 2022-2023 Community Development Block Grant One-Year Action Plan. We have a presentation from our city planner, Chris McLeod. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council, Mr. Vanderpool. I'm back before you again this year with the 2022-2023 Community Development Block Grant budget. As we do every year, this is the 48th year. Fortunately for myself, I haven't been here all 40 of those years, but anyway, we'll go through this again. So the use of the funds, again, this is CDBG, Community Development Block Grant. The use of the funds is generally described as intended to be for housing revitalization and to revitalize neighborhoods in general, as well as to improve community facilities for low to moderate income persons. That's the overall arching effects of these monies. Right now, I do want to reiterate that this is an estimated allocation through HUD, but right now it's estimated to be $808,000, just over that. That number will continue to be refined as it goes through the HUD process, and ultimately a number pops out of their formula. But generally speaking, those numbers are relatively similar when the final numbers come out. When those final numbers come out, if this is ultimately approved, each one of the line items will be adjusted accordingly based on the final allocation. So funding considerations, obviously when this goes through the process through our administrative team as well as the Citizen Advisory Commission, they take a look at how many residents will benefit from the program. Has the requesting agency complied with past CDBG contract requirements? Did the agency attend and present their request at a public hearing? That is a mandatory item. And then finally, was the requesting agency able to answer questions about the program? Obviously, as they're vetted through the public hearing process, we need to make sure that if there are any questions that are raised, that they fully understand, what they're requesting and what their ultimate service would be. So some of the limitations with the CDBG funds themselves, 15% of that total 808 allocation can be utilized for what's deemed as to be public services. Those are for the services like McRest, Macomb Community College, the library's homebound books, basically anything that provides essentially a service, right? So of that number, 121,000, just over 121,000 would be available for utilization as public services. And as you can see in the backup materials, there was a number of agencies that obviously requested that funding and did receive funding. Everyone that did request funding did receive at least some allocation, as we have in every year that I'm aware of, at least leading up to this. The other part of that allocation is for capital projects, so the other side of that money equation. As of this year, or as of the allocation right now, $525,000 would essentially be available for that. So typically we do minor home repair. Teresa in our CDBG program does a great job of administering that. So as of right now, about $44,000 is allocated for minor home repair. Bonneville Drive concrete replacements, right now $190,000 is allocated for Bonneville Drive. I do want to indicate that when a local road improvement is done, it has to be in a qualifying area within the city. We can't simply choose any roadway which needs repair. It has to be within a qualifying area. So Teresa works with our engineering department to determine what's the best street or roadway within a particular qualifying section that we should allocate money to on a yearly basis. And then finally, senior center restroom renovations and LED lighting improvements. The senior center itself is a qualifying element or an entity. So with that, the allocation that was recommended was just over $291,000. So with that, that kind of sums up the allocation that we've seen to this point. And then as it's before you, you have the final say in terms of the allocation budget. So with that, any questions you have, I'll be more than glad to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on this item? If not, council, we need a motion.
Mayor Taylor?
Mrs. Schmidt.
Resolved to approve the fiscal 2022-2023 Community Development Block Grant One-Year Action Plan as recommended by the Citizens Advisory Committee and City Administration based on the estimated entitlement of $808,389 and authorize City Administration to complete the federal application and secure the funds.
Support.
Been moved and supported. Any discussion, Mrs. Schmidt?
I do, Mayor. Just a comment. I'd like to thank the Citizens Advisory Committee and City Administration. They really work hard at allocating and trying to give everyone a little piece of the pie. And also, they went so far as to make provisions in case the allocation isn't as was predicted. If it was less than or more, they've allocated funds accordingly. So I appreciate them putting in that extra effort and wanted to thank them very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Schmidt. Council, anyone else?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Radke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am going to vote against this today, and not because I think the CDBG is doing a bad job or because these are not worthy entities, but I have become increasingly frustrated over the last 5 years that this always seems to be a rubber stamp and always comes out the same. Every year we fix one street. Every year the same organizations get the same money. Every year the senior center gets a repair. You know, this money is supposed to benefit the most number of people in our city in the hardest hit areas of our city. And it seems to me that the money keeps coming right back here to City Hall when a lot of the areas of our city that this money would qualify for are not around City Hall. And I find that to be very frustrating. And I think I've spoken on this almost every year. Other cities use this money differently. You know, we are spending a huge tranche of money to fix one street, and I think every street needs to be fixed while we have safe streets. But couldn't we fix so much more sidewalk in some of the lower income areas of our city by using this money? And what's more likely? Someone who's in a lower income area, who's maybe disabled, having a car and driving to work every day? Or is it more likely that they're using the public sidewalk maybe to go to the bus stops? Why couldn't this money be used to repair or fix our smart bus stops so that they're handicap accessible, so that they are disabled accessible, excuse me, my mother was disabled, so that they have sidewalks so they can get onto the bus, so they have benches to sit? You know, why can't this be used for trees or sidewalk or any number of other uses? And every year it comes back, and then in our packet, the summary of the meeting is 2 sentences long. It says they had a discussion and they just went ahead and approved what the city put before them. And I don't know what discussion, what other ideas were talked about? Were any other things suggested? You know, this money could be used to benefit the hard-hit areas of our city, but I see it benefiting City Hall, a street every year, and the same organization. So I find this to be completely frustrating, and I will continue to vote against these until we get some new ideas and really discuss ways to improve the entire city for the most number of people, not just for City Hall. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Radke. Anyone else? With no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries 6 ayes, 1 no. Moving on, next item on our agenda is to consider approval of a stipulated, amended, and restated consent judgment in the case Peter Vestovich et al. Versus City of Sterling Heights, Macomb Circuit Court, case number 07-2424CE. We have a presentation from our city planner, Chris McLeod. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council, Mr. Vanderpool. As you know, Mr. Mayor, before you tonight is a requested amendment, a first amendment to existing consent judgment that was originally approved back in 2008. It has obviously never been constructed, but as a consent judgment sits with the property forever until otherwise amended or removed by the court system itself. So with that, the current applicants came forward to us and requested some minor changes, and we'll go through those very quickly. But just as a brief background, this is the southwest corner of 19 and Mound. Again, this is kind of looking to a southwesterly direction from the one side of Mound, and then obviously looking to the northeast into the intersection itself, where the proposed development would sit, abutting single-family residential to the west and to the south for the most part, and then to the east and to the north are essentially non-residential properties across 19 and across Mound. This is the overall site plan. Again, this is largely the same as what was originally approved in the 2008 consent judgment. The main focus of the development itself to the northeast corner or the front corner of the site would be a gas station use as well as a attached drive-through coffee use on the south side of the property or on the south side of that building. To the south of that is one of the changes that is being proposed. Originally, there was a office building to the south end of the property. The developer has requested that that building ultimately be utilized for retail. And then to the west property, or which would be phase two, which is shown to the left-hand side of this screen, would also be a medical office or general office building. That remains unchanged from the previous use that was originally approved in that location. So overall, the consent judgment kind of recognizes this as four main uses on the property itself. Again, the gas station, the drive-through space on the south end of the gas station, the retail use to the south end of the property, and the office use to the west-hand side of the property. As you can note on here as well, if you can see the screen, this site is proposed to be developed in two phases. Phase one would be the front half or the eastern half of the property, which would include the gas station, the drive-through, and the retail. The phase two portion of the property would be the medical office building in terms of if that was developed as phase two or when that was developed as phase two. The applicant did bring the site into and above and beyond compliance with the city's ordinance requirements for landscaping. The previous approved landscape plan was under the city's previous ordinances, again being originally approved in 2008. So you can see extensive landscaping being provided throughout the site. Of particular note is the mixing of berming as well as landscape planting and preservation of existing trees or some existing trees, particularly along the western property line. So we worked with the applicant to kind of mix and match, if you will, in terms of the screening scenarios to the west and to the south to provide protection to those existing single-family residences, again, to the south and to the west of the subject site. This was the previous plan, obviously a little bit different. Again, this was the 2008 plan, but again, you can see essentially the building configuration is largely the same. You can see the gas station and the restaurant use kind of again to the front half or the front corner of the site. That what is now the retail portion of the building to the south, originally that was an office building again, and then to the west was an office building as well. Again, some minor changes to the building unit configuration, but overall the layout of the building has remained, or the site has remained unchanged since 2008. And again, we've increased the landscaping throughout the entire site, including to the west and to the south against those residential areas. This just kind of shows the phasing plan. This kind of shows the rendering in terms of the overall architecture of the buildings. Again, the gas station towards the front, the attached drive-through unit to the what would be the upper left-hand portion of the front building, which is actually the south end of the building in that instance. That retail building to the far upper left-hand corner, and then the office building to the far right-hand corner. Again, we've also proposed use restrictions in terms of the office building that would be to the west-hand side or the upper right-hand portion of this would have no urgent care, 24-hour urgent cares, would have an hour limitation that the offices must cease operation no later than 9 o'clock. The retail portion of the building to the south end or to the upper left-hand portion of the building of this particular drawing would have hours of operation not to exceed 10 o'clock. The gas station and drive-through use would not have an hours of operation limitation. The previous consent judgment spoke to no hours whatsoever. So in reality, they could have operated under a 24-hour in any of those buildings. There wouldn't necessarily have been a limitation on that. But again, the buildings that directly abut residential, we felt it was appropriate and pertinent to limit the hours of operation in both of those buildings. This shows the previous renderings, again, in that 2008 consent judgment. Again, not a huge variation from what you originally saw, but again, the idea, increasing the landscaping, freshening up the architecture, some of the uses changed slightly, but again, bringing it more into line of what the city expects in 2022 versus 2008. Just some up-close renderings, if you will. This is the southern building. That's the office building to the west-hand side. So with that, that's my presentation for tonight. The applicant is present if you have any questions for the applicant, but if you have any questions for me, I'll be more than glad to try to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. If the applicant wants to make some remarks, welcome you up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councilmen and women. Thank you, Chris, for the presentation. Vito Pamplona, Pamplona Construction Manager, here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll deliberate on it, and if we have questions, we'll call you back up.
Thank you very much.
Okay. At this time, I'll go to the audience. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak on this item? If not, council, we need a motion.
Mayor Taylor,
Mrs. Sarowski.
resolve to approve the stipulated amended and restated consent judgment on the case Peter Vestovich et al. Versus City of Sterling Heights, Macomb Circuit Court case number 07.2424CE, and authorize the city attorney to sign all documents required in conjunction with this approval.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any discussion, Mrs. Sarowski?
No, I think that Mr. McLeod was very good in describing what the consent judgment and the changes were. I am very happy that there's improved landscaping. Any buildings that abut, the times are at 9 o'clock, correct, Mr. McLeod, through the chair to Mr. McLeod?
Mr. McLeod.
So to the west side of the property where the office building is, that is limitation to 9 PM. To the south, where the retail building is, that is limited to 10 PM.
But that does that abut residents?
Correct.
There's some housing right there? Okay, so thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so 10 o'clock, some of us do stay up that late, but, okay, but there is a lot of tree and berming to help prevent.
Mr. McLeod.
Mr. McLeod.
That is correct. There's a mix of, in that particular location, it's mostly berm and new plantings in that particular location on the south side. But on the west side, there's a mix of berm, new plantings, and existing tree preservation where feasible.
Okay. And I know that we have increased landscaping from what we had recorded in '08, so I'm going to be voting yes on this. I think that will be sufficient. So thank you very much. And good luck with your new venture. Thank you, sir. Okay, that's all I have for that. Thank you, sir.
Mrs. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Through the chair to Mr. McLeod. Mr. McLeod, can you show me on the diagram where the speaker is going to be for the drive-through?
So speaker for the drive-through is going to be basically behind the building or to the west side of the building.
Okay.
So it's either going to be drastically separated if Phase 2 is not developed at that point in terms of the separation to the residential to the far west. Once Phase 2 is constructed, obviously there'll be a building between the speaker system or the order area and the property to the west. To the south, there's obviously a significant distance as well.
And how many feet is it from there to the property line?
To the west or the south or both?
To the west.
Okay. To the west, realistically, you're probably over 150 feet, almost 200 feet at that point.
Okay. Okay, I like that there's a buffer, Phase 2, that building will buffer that as well. And also the plantings around the circumference of the property, is that going to be done with the initial phase completed?
The initial phase would include the landscaping on Phase 1 itself. As of right now, I don't believe Phase 2 plantings would be going in until Phase 2 is constructed.
So I guess through the chair to the developer, if I could ask you if that would be a possibility to put that buffer in initially as well.
So on Phase 2, in the back of that building there, it's heavily treed. So we're going to leave all the deciduous trees there.
Okay.
And then once we go in to develop Phase 2, we will then implement the landscape plan that you see in front of you.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have nothing further.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Schmidt. Mr. Radke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, to the developer, but you can say sitting down. I don't think I need you. I just want to commend you for keeping some of the landmark trees and for really going above and beyond in the landscaping plan. Traditionally, on a development like this, we require a masonry wall between residential and commercial buildings, but with the berm and the greenery, I think you've gone above and beyond, both creating something nice for the residents behind them, helping us with our tree canopy, and I think just making a nice looking development compared to what it was originally. So that's all I had to say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Radke. Anyone else, council? If not, thank you for being here today and answering our questions. We appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. McLeod, for the presentation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Looking forward to it. Thank you. All right, that concludes that portion of our agenda, and we will move on to communications from citizens. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on any item not on tonight's agenda? Start with you, Mr. Inks.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, and good evening to you, the council and city administration. My name is Nathan Inks. I wanted to briefly talk about speeding and road design tonight. Specifically, Ryan Road, and this has been a topic that residents have brought up before. Speeding on Ryan Road is an issue that's been posted about on social media and commented at previous city council meetings. A couple weeks ago, I was driving north on Ryan Road, stopped at the light at 19 Mile, and I had a vehicle come up behind me driving about 70 to 80 miles an hour in the center turn lane, blow through the red light and continue on. It was going so fast, and I didn't even catch the license plate, so I didn't even bother calling the non-emergency number because by the time I had my phone out, he was already gone. But I think this incident, as well as the other incidents that residents have highlighted before, is illustrative of the fact that Ryan Road is designed in a way that accommodates speeding and reckless driving. I would encourage the city to look into pursuing some sort of road diet on Ryan Road, whether that would be a reduction in the number of lanes or just a reduction in the width of the lanes. I'm obviously not a traffic engineer or a traffic expert, so I don't profess to have what the right answer would be there, but I think it's something that the city should look into. I also think the city should look into roundabouts, especially north of 16 Mile. Obviously, that would require some coordination with the county, as we don't control all of those intersections. But I think that roundabouts along Ryan Road would be feasible. It would reduce the ability for drivers to blow through intersections. Obviously, if there's something in the middle of the intersection, they can't drive through that. So it would reduce the ability for people to get up to that 70, 80 miles an hour because they'd be slowing down at least every mile. Would also increase the amount of traffic volume that could go through those intersections, which would potentially be a way of offsetting the decrease in traffic flow that the city might see if there was an elimination in some of the lanes on the north part of Ryan Road. And, I think probably one of the big potential problems with reducing the number of lanes on Ryan would be, can the city still move the traffic that is currently moving along Ryan Road if there's a reduction in lanes? And I think what the city should be looking at is, do we actually need to be moving the volume of traffic that we're currently moving? How much are we paying for our roads to enable people to drive through Sterling Heights instead of enabling them to drive to or from Sterling Heights? We don't see any economic benefit spending money on roads that makes it easier for people to drive through the city. The only economic benefit that comes to the city is when people are driving to or from a location in Sterling Heights. And to this extent, I think Ryan Road is just one example. I would encourage the city to go through and look at the feasibility of potentially doing road diets on all of our streets where we have 4 lanes or greater. Do we really need this much concrete on all of our roads? Can we reduce the amount of traffic coming through our city? And as a result, can we reduce the amount of money that we're spending on our road projects? So that's all I have. Would just encourage you to look into that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Inks. Appreciate your comments. Mrs. Wright.
Council, Mr. Mayor. I sort of want to piggyback off what Mr. Inks was saying. We're trying to move the city more towards these walkability districts, the mixed use, the biking, and there's no way none of us are going to walk on these streets when you have cars going 85 miles an hour blasting through the stoplights. Even if there's, a walk right there, I'm not going to ride my bike or walk with my kids across Ryan or across Mound or Van Dyke or any of these roads. So if we really do want to make our city more walkable, more bikeable, we really need to start thinking about how to decrease the speeding in the area. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anyone else under communications from citizens? Ms. Elias?
I live on Ryan, and I don't see a problem. I see a lot of people using the bicycles and crossing the streets. I've not seen the 80 miles, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. Good evening, Taylor and council people. It's a pleasure to see you again. I just wanted to speak about the sexual orientation, gender identity ordinance that you passed without the vote of the people. Again, you've done that where we were surprised by it. We know and we believe in the dignity of every individual. They're all deserving of respect, and our laws should protect the constitutionality, guaranteed freedoms of every citizen, not just some, no matter who they are. Unfortunately, the sexual orientation, gender identity basically undermines both our freedoms and our fairness. Let me just share with you how it infringes upon our free speech and conscience. We know specifically that this ordinance is to provide special treatment for those who are of sexual orientation or gender identity. However, when you look at the current ordinance and look at the definition of sex and look at the exemptions that applies to it, whether to restrict use of laboratories and locker rooms based on sex, as well as participate in the membership of athletic events based on sex. When you go to the definition of sex, can I show it for someone to see, or you don't do that anymore? Here's a definition of sex. I don't know if you can see it. Right here. It includes gender. Sex includes but not limited to pregnancy, childbirth, or medical condition related to pregnancy or childbirth. This is not the way most people perceive what sex is. They see it as biological male and female. So they seem to think the exclusions are going to be held, but I don't believe they are. Because we believe girls' and women's safety and privacy issues are real. And the fact that a woman wants to not have a man who pretends or assumes he's a woman to come into the bathroom, shower rooms, or even in the sports arena. I think we need to protect women. We're supposed to care about our women, and I think they need to also have that protection. But when you introduce a law like this, it doesn't make it equal. It gives them special protection because that is in law. That law takes precedence over their safety and their privacy. And what really bothers me a little bit is I really appreciate that you guys try to put those exclusions on, but they're really meaningless when it comes to the definition of sex. The other thing I'm concerned about, and I think a lot of people were a little upset as well, that this was introduced in winter. And according to Mr. Michael Taylor, he intended it to be introduced in winter so we would not gather the sufficient signatures. In fact, he stated that he would like us to freeze our blank off. So the point is this a fair way to hear what your constituents that you're supposed to represent? You should care about your constituents. You should want to hear them. We were able to collect 4,200 signatures. That is short of the 7,400 only because it was in winter. Well, do you represent every resident here or just a few, Mr. Taylor? Because obviously that clap was meant only for a certain few. Because there's a lot of people who are concerned about the safety of their children and about the possibility of where this would lead into the schools. Because once you have an ordinance like this, it doesn't stop here. We know it, it progresses, and the most important part we have to say basically is, while we believe in the Constitution that all men are created equal.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Elias.
Okay.
Anyone else under communications from citizens? Ms. Early?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I think Mrs. Zelaya mentioned some of the things that I wanted to mention. No need for the applause. You know how hard working people we are. And we try. We are checking, and my plea to you tonight, I know you had your opinion about the issue, and because you are sitting there, you represent and made a decision. I would like to thank you, our city attorney, for when this was coming up, you advised to wait some time while you will review it, will get time. And sad to hear that your advice was not taken. We want, in the same way that you had your opinion about the issue, it doesn't mean that in general the city has it. We didn't have enough time. The winter didn't help, even though I came from a 90, 100-degree country. I froze my you-know-what being outside. So for you it's funny, for me it was a hard work. What we want to ask you, we also had, and the proof that in such short period of time, so many people signed the petition, and up to this point, there are people who had still petitions that wanted to turn it in. We would like to plead to you, give us the right to have an extension. If I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong. Nothing in the chapter said that we cannot have an extension. So if you could answer that to us, if that is a possibility, and if we can have it, or if we can't, we will also be checking, but today was the deadline, so no time to be checking about it. I just want you to consider, you expressed your opinion about the residents. We want the residents to be here from our side. You 7 people here made a decision for the entire city. It will be so fair to let the residents do it, be brought to a referendum and let them decide. It's all I have for you. Thank you for your time, and have a wonderful rest of the week. It's getting warm.
Thank you, Ms. Early. We'll get back to you on that. Mr. Nelson, come on up, Ms. Elias.
Ken Nelson, Fire Steel Drive, Sterling Heights. That was a great display, Mr. Taylor. I am so disappointed in our leadership. I tell you, the people that just got up and talked about all the work that they went through because they didn't believe in what 7 legislators, local legislators, put together to give to the rest of the residents, the 134,300, and I think we had that, I don't think it went from 130 to 134,000, but you people legislate our local ordinances. And all that this petition was asking for is that this be put to the people, that this was not something that 7 legislators should look at. You know, I've been all over. I've been to the Planning Commission. We have items going up, 5-story buildings. We have 64 units going in on a small lot on Irving. I didn't hear one person speak in favor of any of these projects, yet they pass. What are you guys doing? I sit here and what I get every time I talk is what I'm getting right now. Stare right at me and try to get me to sit down. I will not sit down. Just want to tell you that the next time that you see anything from me, it will be a recall petition for all 7 of you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nelson. Yes, sir.
My name's Peter Watton. So I heard the stuff like people don't want this, so I pulled up some numbers. City council averaged between 9,000 to 12,000 votes at the election. I went to a meeting right before the election, and this issue got brought up. City council supported it. I personally agree with it. But this shows 9 to 12,000 people agreed with this topic. That's not 7 people. That's thousands of community members who decided to go out and support this along with the buildings and everything else the city council has worked for. So by saying people don't support this, I just view that as wrong. And people have supported it. And yes, you know what, I'm looking now, 7,000 people voted for other candidates, and then maybe those people didn't agree. But we are a government that votes for people who represent us. And the people sitting in front of us are those people this community chose.
Thank you very much, sir. Good to see you again, Peter. Anyone else under communications from citizens? If not, I'll close that portion and we'll go on. Oh, you want to speak, young man? Come on up.
Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel. I personally agree with what Mr. Ratek said about the CDB. Why is it only going to one particular thing? Why is it going to one thing? It'd be one thing if this was one different thing every time, but why is it going to just one thing or a few people? That's oddly suspicious, do you not think? You're supposed to represent us. Many of us agree that you should work for us. Why should only be one people benefit? Why all of us should benefit from this? Now, some of you may think, you can say all you want that, well, it's going to a couple different things, but personally.
All right, I gave you a little bit of leeway. And I know you're new, I don't think I've seen you speak at a city council meeting before, so I didn't want to cut you off. But under our rules, this portion of the meeting, you are permitted to speak on any topic in the world that you want germane to city business, as long as it wasn't on our agenda. So if you wanted to speak on CDBG, you were supposed to come up and speak during the portion where we actually deliberated on it. But I wanted to give you a little bit of space, make your point. I think we've got your point, and some of us can perhaps address it at the end if we want to, okay?
Apologies for stuttering, and I'm open to suggestions. Thank you.
No issue.
Great job.
You spoke well, and I appreciate you coming to make your point. I don't necessarily agree, but that's okay. We can.
I'm open to suggestions, like I said.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else under communications from citizens? If not, all right, I'll close that portion and we'll go on to reports from city administration. Mr. Vanderpool, anything for tonight?
Mayor, just a couple things. I wanted to respond to Mr. Inks because I encourage you to attend. You normally do attend the council meetings, but on April 5th, we will have the next round of ARPA recommendations for city council's consideration. And one of the items in that plan is an allocation of $100,000 to hire a very experienced traffic consultant to look at traffic calming across the city, as you suggested, not only on major roads like Ryan, but also on neighborhood roads as well. And some of the ideas I'd be looking at is the traditional roundabouts that we're accustomed to, in addition to smaller neighborhood roundabouts and circles, and island, pedestrian islands along neighborhood roads, and also some major roads. We're looking at some of those ideas right now on 15 and Van Dyke. But many other traffic calming ideas, including medians and narrowing roadways and so on. Now, a lot of that's, long-term initiatives and requires lots of funding, but you got to start somewhere. And I think most would agree we could do much better in terms of traffic calming in the city, especially on roads like Ryan. So stay tuned for more information. I'm hoping that gets finalized in our final ARPA approval. Ultimately, City Council has to approve it, but I feel good that we at least have that in the recommendation, and it's, I think, a prudent approach. One other thing I did want to highlight on CDBG just quickly, that there are many entities. I'm just clicking them off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 entities that are receiving funding. The Community Action Committee does go through a process where they publicize applications and encourage not-for-profits to submit requests for grant funding. So they work with the best they have. They try to get as many organizations involved as possible. But there are many, many groups that receive CDBG funding. And I might mention on an earlier CDBG round of funding, we had many businesses across the city that also received CDBG funding that benefited their low to moderate income employees. So the committee does the best they can. There's always room for improvement. We can talk about ideas how to improve it moving forward, but I did want to highlight that. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vanderpool. Mr. Koszywski, anything tonight?
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
All right, council, any new business or reports? Mrs. Schmidt?
Mayor Taylor, thank you. Without objection from my colleagues on council, I'd like to instruct city administration to come up with a resolution to send not only to Governor Whitmer, our state legislatures, but Great Lakes Water Authority. We were given notification this week that over the past 10 years, the Sterling Heights ratepayers have subsidized $2.7 million to the city of Highland Park for their non-payment of water. And I think it's deplorable. I think something needs to be done. I know there's multiple lawsuits, and I know that Ms. Varney, our financial director, sent a letter to the governor. However, I think council needs to send something to show how this is just not right and how our ratepayers deserve better. I'm not sure what would happen if Sterling Heights ratepayers stopped paying their water bills. I'm not sure who would subsidize that. I'm sure there would be much more blowback, but there are corporations in the city of Highland Park that are not paying water. There are residents in the city of Highland Park not paying water, and we are all paying their water. And I think enough is enough. So without objection.
Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful idea. I do want to say, I'll let the other council members speak. I doubt anybody is going to object to that. But I will say that Commissioner Miller is looking at this. Commissioner Candace Miller from the Public Works, County Public Works, is looking into this. I've received a few communications from her about formulating a plan. We have a meeting scheduled for Wednesday of next week with Brian Baker, Commissioner Miller, other members of her staff, and mayors and supervisors throughout the county to talk about what we can do, because you're absolutely right. It's not fair. It's unconscionable that an entire city could stop paying its water and
For years.
and then it just gets passed on to us as if it's no big deal. The state has to step in and wrong this right. So I'm 100% in agreement with you, and I'll open it up to anybody else that has any comments. Mrs. Zarko.
Mayor Taylor, thank you. I couldn't agree more. I think we do need to do something, but my question is what happens if we stopped paying that portion of the water bills? What happens if every other community that is subsidizing that city decided we're not paying it anymore? And what happens then? Are we starting, like this to snowball so we can get some resolution? Because it's been in court for how many years? I mean, this isn't new, but when did you ever tell your cable company that, oh, you promised me I wasn't going to get any raises since 2012, and so I'm still going to pay the same rate that I did in 2012, 10 years ago? Nobody out there does that. So I think their argument is baseless. But what can we do to speed up this process so that we aren't paying or subsidizing Highland Park? So I'm definitely in agreement.
Mr. Radke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am in absolute agreement. I would just say that we should make a resolution and put it on next council meeting's agenda.
That's what I said.
I just said a letter. I
No.
apologize.
Yeah, she said a resolution.
That's my fault. I must have misheard you. But I just think it's unconscionable that we are required to pay the bills of a municipality that will not. And I agree with Councilwoman Zarko that maybe we should withhold a portion and say, if what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If they're able to do it, our residents should not be forced to subsidize theirs. And I read in the Detroit News, I want to say, that they are looking for $90 million to restart their water plant. I wish I could find $90 million anywhere, and I don't know how Highland Park, a city of 10,000 people, is going to find $90 million to create a water authority. So for the foreseeable future, they're going to be part of the GLWA. They have to pull their weight and pay their fair share. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else on this? Okay, Mrs. Smith, thank you for bringing that to our attention. I think we have clear and unanimous support for such a resolution, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Vanderpool. Council, anyone else?
Mayor Taylor?
Mrs. Zarko.
Okay, through the chair to Mrs. Riska, I know that it just came up in my head while we were sitting here, but do you know if we have any openings on the Youth Advisory Board?
Ms. Riska.
I don't believe so, but I would have to check. I don't know for sure off the top of my head.
Well, only because Peter and Daniel seem to be so active tonight that I was wondering if they might be interested in even, or if they qualified or to fill out an application, and we certainly would like your input in other areas. So if you could look into that and, you know, we can find out for you. We'll put you to work.
You were open to suggestions.
And then you can help us,
Careful what
because
you
you
sign
did,
yourself up for.
it takes courage to get up, you know,
A
to
lot
the
of
podium and
courage.
speak, especially speak your mind, not knowing if somebody's going to agree with you or not. So I really look up to both of you for doing
Yeah.
that tonight, and I certainly would like to hear more from you.
Yes, you should really put your name in.
If you
both
guys
of you.
want, you can go write your name and contact information. I've got yours, Peter, but
Yeah.
Daniel, if you want to write your name and contact information for the city clerk, she can take it and share it with us. And if you don't want to, I can reach out to Peter sometime over the next couple of days and we'll
Get it
connect.
from him anyway.
And then
No pressure.
We'll see if there's some ideas we have for you guys.
Poor guy.
No
He signed up
pressure,
for it.
no
Yeah.
pressure.
Anyone else, council?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Radke.
Several things. I guess I'll start with the last, which is now the first. You know, I just have to give credit to the Boy Scouts, I guess, of Sterling Heights and all the work that they're doing. I was a Boy Scout once. I made Star Scout, which was a lot of work back in the day. But to the point that you made, you did a tremendous job addressing this council. You know, when I was, took to high school, it may be hard to know from me, I was very shy. And I had trouble public speaking. I took public speaking classes and I just attacked it. And now my colleagues will tell you they can't get me to shut up. So.
Nope.
So just, it's one of those things you work at, you continuously work at, present your ideas, and you'll get more comfortable. And you did a tremendous job tonight. You should be very proud of yourself. Really, you got your point across, and I thought it was great. The rules are the rules, but you don't know, so we'll chalk that up to learning, you know.
It's okay.
You did a tremendous job. Couple different things. Just briefly I'm so happy, Mr. Mayor, that the human rights ordinance is going to go into effect and is going to be passed. You know, there's a lot of fear mongering out there in the community. I think some of it happened at our meeting today. This does not give any special privileges to anyone. What it does is it protects the human rights of everyone. Everyone in the city has a right to live here in peace, harmony, not to be discriminated against or bothered. We should all be proud of it. You know, and to some of the points made by some people up at the microphone, I would just say this, you know, the city council was reelected by the voters. We talked about this before the election. We talked about it during the election. We talked about it after the election. You know, it's on my website. I've talked about this incessantly since I first started coming to council meetings back in 2013. And anyone who voted for me knew I was in favor of this. There's no doubt. And I think the fact that the signatures could not be gathered shows just how little support for repealing this ordinance is in our community. Moving on, I guess one thing that's come to my attention is I've attended several planning commission meetings and really started to discuss our PUD requirements and other requirements. And I guess without objection, I'd ask that the city administration present a report on parking minimums, not only in Sterling Heights, but in comparable cities like Ann Arbor, Royal Oak, Ferndale, I guess similar sized cities, Dearborn, because it seems to me that in a lot of the developments that have been coming before the planning commission, I guess, and let me finish, then you can ask for anyone who has an objection. There's just too much parking. And that, you know, it goes from either being too little parking, where we got to have a little bit more, but having too much. And we need to right size this. And there's books on this, you know, stronger communities, strong towns, and other things where they talk about how we overbuild parking and then we try to rectify it after the fact. So I'd like to get on the front end and stop overbuilding and then trying to fix it afterward. You know, we have a Meyer, which is always the worst offender in my mind, at 16 Mile and Van Dyke, which is one example. that has miles and miles of parking. And now in the last 5 years, they've come back and I think done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 6 outbuildings in their parking lot. And they still have too much parking. Go by there any time of day. The parking lot is never full. It's never at 80% capacity. And I think we really need to start thinking about parking differently. So I'd urge the city to read a report, and hopefully we can change our ordinances, because if parking isn't being used at least 60, 70% of the time, it's just wasted space where water can run off, it can pollute our roadways, we're paying to maintain it. It doesn't make sense. So without objection, Mr. Mayor, I'd ask the city to prepare that report.
Okay, any objection?
I just have a question, no objection, but it is just a report. We're not changing anything.
No,
We're not changing anything, we're just getting a
just asking a
report.
report on information first.
Okay.
Before I can change anything, I want to know what other people are doing.
Just a report.
Yes.
Okay, looks like we have some direction there for you, Mr. Vanderpool. Anything else, Mr. Radke?
Yes, and to piggyback off that, today I was given the PUD ordinance for Charlevoix, Michigan, but I've seen this in other cities' PUD ordinances like Ann Arbor. Coming up, I think, right now, but going forward, we're going to have tremendous PUDs, mixed-use projects, apartment buildings coming forward, and I think we really need to investigate a affordable housing component to these projects. Now, we have gone out of our way as a city council to approve pilots, to approve affordable housing throughout the city, but reading comments online and reading emails from people, it seems to me that people always think that, like, this entire building is public housing over there, or this whole thing is affordable housing over there. What other cities are doing, what Ann Arbor and other cities are doing, is they're requiring in all new buildings 1 or 2 units to be put aside for affordable housing purposes. This doesn't concentrate affordable housing in one area of the city, but instead would make it a component of all buildings going forward, all large PUDs and large apartment complexes. That way, 1, we're not consolidating it in any one place. 2, we're creating opportunities across the city for people to live at all income streams. And 3, we're kind of filling some of the goals that both the big 3 and other people are talking about, giving the ability for their workers that operate our plants, that really make Sterling Heights hum as industry, live within 30 minutes to an hour of the place where they work. Because right now, they're priced out of Sterling Heights. I can't tell you how, since I've been up here, how many times we've approved $400,000 houses, $300,000 houses, tons of new expensive construction. What I'd like, instead of just thinking about a pilot, just thinking about one building, ingraining in our ordinances the idea that these big buildings should have affordable housing available across the community. So without objection, I'd like a report on what other cities are doing and possible ways we could change our ordinance to encourage more affordable housing. Mr. Mayor.
Council, any objection? Hearing none.
And
Mr. Vanderpool.
Looking good? Okay. And on that, I think almost the entire council is going to the Michigan Capital Conference this week to lobby our legislators and learn more about public policy, including how to spend ARPA funds and other things like that. We are constantly working for the people of Sterling Heights. We have to stay at the Radisson in Lansing, which is almost the worst hotel, I think, in the state. And I would just say that we are working very hard for the people of Sterling Heights. The conference is a lot of work, and that's why we had this meeting today on Monday. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Radke. Anyone else, council?
He's really going to hear me speak for 10 minutes tomorrow.
That's right. I highlighted on my agenda.
I'm sure, I'm going to miss it, Madam President, but I'm sure it'll be a wonderful speech. Mr. Yanez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say, even though Myers does have too much parking, I can never get close enough to the door to make it convenient. Through the chair to Mr. Vanderpool, I just wanted to ask, the interoffice memorandum on landscaping contract analysis and marked confidential, does this mean we can't share it outside of city council? And if so, how do we change it so we can share it outside of city council?
Don't we get to make those rules, Mr. Vanderpool?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilman Yanez, I mean, This certainly, it's confidential in that I wanted first city council to review the material.
Okay.
Before, we posted it publicly. But it certainly is something that can be shared publicly. If there's some means you want us to do that, we're happy to do it.
Well,
If you want to do it, you can do it, but there's no secrets here.
Okay.
In fact, all the contracts were already approved publicly by the city council.
Sure, and it is taxpayers' dollars, so I think we should be able to share that with the taxpayers. So that's it. Other than, I do want to respond to the gentleman's comment about us staring at him. I'm, honest to goodness, I'm being polite. I'm listening to you. This is what my wife calls active listening. I'm not trying to stare you down. I'm trying to pay attention. Swear to God. That's all I have to say.
All right, thank you, Mr. Yanez. Anyone else? Okay, I'll try to be brief too. I broke my own rule because I don't like when people applaud. It was unprofessional, but I can't exactly say I'm sorry for it, and I'm not going to apologize for it. This is an issue that's dealing with, as Mr. Radke said, human rights, basic human rights. And we hear a lot about special treatment, but what we're talking about is sexual orientation. We're saying that we're not going to allow you to discriminate based on sexual orientation, and every single human being in the world has a sexual orientation. Every one of us. It doesn't matter what yours is. What we're saying is you cannot be discriminated for it. Just like everybody has a race, everybody has an ethnicity. You can't be discriminated for it. So it's like the mark of a con man where you take something that's being done and you twist it. So people are being discriminated still in this country based on their sexual orientation. And it's not straight people, okay? So instead of acknowledging that and trying to right that wrong, there are folks like you guys who make it seem like they're getting special treatment, like there's some protected class above and beyond the rest of us. It's really incredible how you twist yourself in knots over that. And look, I'm incredibly proud that this ordinance passed, that it's here to stay. I'll take a tiny minor bit of credit for the timing of it. If it had anything to do, if the cold weather here in Michigan had anything to do with the fact that you failed to trick people, and you did trick people. I saw your tactics. I sat there last time and I watched and I observed. I had somebody call me and say, I'm so excited. I signed the petition. I can't wait to vote for this. And I said, what are you talking about? She says, I'm going to vote in favor of this non-discrimination ordinance that the petition gatherers were trying to put on the ballot. I said, they tricked you. They tricked you. They're not trying to put it on the ballot. They're trying to rescind it. It's already law. What you did was make it possible for this ordinance to be rescinded. I saw the social media posts where you're lying about the content of the ordinance. So I'm proud that it's here to stay. I can unequivocally say that there's going to be no extension of the time period, Ms. Early. I don't know why you would come up here and ask us that. That's not going to be granted. You're either wasting our time, or you're so detached from the reality of the situation that you would make such a request. We're not going to grant more time. We want this to be law. We're not going to grant you more time to go try trick voters into signing something that makes it easier to discriminate against people. We don't want that. I'm proud of this city council. I'm proud of this city for standing up, and this ordinance is on the books to stay. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Support.
It's been moved and supported with no discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.